Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bible Discoveries, the weekend show. My name is Corie, and I am solo once again. Taping this a couple weeks in advance just to give us a little bit of an edge here, because me and Matlock's children they've been cycling through the various viruses that come when you have little kids. So Matlock's taken one for the team today. He is at home watching them, and all the other cast members of Bible Discovery are in various different places. So I'm it today. Thank you for being with me. I apologize for being alone. I like to have a guest with me, or of course Matlock with me, because it's nice to have the banter, to go back and forth. But today we're gonna make do. On this show, if this is your first time here, we are looking at our entire week's reading, because at Bible Discovery TV, we're going through the entire Bible in a year. So today we're focusing on the week. I'm going to give you a recap of the scriptures, and I'm going to discuss some viewer questions that you have sent me today from the YouTube comment section. So thank you for sending in your comments and your questions. Okay, this week, Monday to Sunday, we were supposed to read Deuteronomy 15 to Joshua 4, and on Sunday, Psalm 31 to 33. So I'm going to focus on that Deuteronomy 15 to Joshua 4 section. Let's jump right in. Deuteronomy 15. We learn that in Israel, every 7 years, all debts were canceled. No one's living in debt. No one's swimming in credit card debt. They didn't have credit cards back then, but you see what I'm saying? All the debts were canceled. So this Sabbath year, every 7 years was a Sabbath year. We've learned this from Exodus 21. We've learned this from Leviticus 25. And now we're reading in Deuteronomy 15 that not only do the fields get a rest from being planted, not only did slaves who were working off their debts go free, but people who were in debt were forgiven. And there's a principle that's outlined for Israel in Deuteronomy 15 to be open-handed with people, meaning to give generously with people. And this is in context of knowing that if someone asks you for a loan in year 6, you know that if they don't pay you back within a year, you're going to have to forgive it. It's saying still be generous. As God is generous with you, be generous with the needs of others. And we learn here that when it's in your power to help, ignoring was considered sinful. Really interesting. Deuteronomy 15. Okay, Deuteronomy 16, the Passover, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Tabernacles are explained, and we get the system of judges are outlined. I want to read that because I think we often just, because it's in a section where it's dealing with the feasts, we often focus on the feasts and we miss out on the description of this system of judges, which of course becomes really important because we have an entire time period of Israel that we call today the time period of the judges. And there's a whole book called Judges in the Old Testament that we're going to get to. So Deuteronomy 16, verse 18 to 20. Appoint judges and officials for each of your tribes in every town the Lord your God is giving you, and they shall judge the people fairly. Do not pervert justice or show partiality. Do not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of the innocent. Follow justice and justice alone, so that you may live and possess the land the Lord your God is giving you. Okay, now in light of the time period of the judges, we know that Israel, once they got in the promised land, they were supposed to appoint judges for each tribe, okay? So there's 12 tribes, 12 judges. That's the idea. And we know that there was a special Levitical judge that we're going to get to later on for the Levites that you could go see at the tabernacle and later the temple. But we know in the time period of the judges that God would raise up certain judges to actually deliver Israel from enemies that were oppressing them at that time. But this rule, this system of judges is why it's perfectly acceptable and actually potentially probable that the judges that we read about aren't always in strict chronological order, meaning first there was this judge, then there was this judge, then there was this judge. It could very well be that there were a few different judges ruling at the same time in different areas of Israel because of this, because it was expected that each tribe would have a judge. And then there was a higher court. Again, we're going to get there in today's reading. There was a higher court that you could go to with especially difficult problems, and you would go to the Levitical priests and the judge at the tabernacle at the time. Okay, so we'll move on from that. Deuteronomy 17 has rules for how not to worship God. Not with idols, not with pagan symbols of worship, not with blemished sacrifices. We also learn just how serious it was to be a witness against somebody, especially in a case of capital offense, because the witnesses themselves were to execute the guilty party. They threw the first stones, the witnesses that brought this person before a judge and got them convicted of a crime. So what that means is that if they were false witnesses, they wouldn't just be guilty of being a false witness, but they would also be guilty of murder before God. Because God is the real judge. That's the whole point of the scriptures, is that yes, there's some semblance of justice here on earth, but we're not going to get perfect justice here on earth. We're not going to get perfect justice until we go before the perfect judge, and that's who we're supposed to fear. That's who we're supposed to revere. That's who we're supposed to respect. So if you were a false witness, your act of then executing the person who has been declared guilty of this crime, if they're not actually guilty, you are killing an innocent life on purpose, meaning you are murdering them. Also, this makes me think, this provides context, doesn't it, to the New Testament account of the woman accused of adultery that people brought before Jesus, and they were like, the law says we should stone her. What do you say? And Jesus says to them, he who is without sin, cast the first stone. So I believe this is Jesus not saying, if you have any sin, you're not righteous enough to execute the law. But this is Jesus calling into account, are you a real witness here? Or are you a false witness? Are you doing things according to the law? If so, where's the guy? Because they just brought the woman. Was their intent to actually execute the law? Or was their intent to trap Jesus? And they all left. It's interesting, isn't it? When you have the Old Testament context to a New Testament situation, because the context of Jesus and those men was the law. It was the Mosaic law. So I think that's interesting as well here in Deuteronomy 17. Okay, and this is where in Deuteronomy 17 we learn that there is a higher court that people in Israel could go to. So say you're part of the tribe of Dan and you have an issue, and so you take your issue to the judge of Dan, the tribal judge of Dan. It's too hard for him, so what does he do? He sends you to the Levitical tribe, this higher tribe. So you go see the Levitical priests and the Levite judge, and they decide. They bring the case before the presence of God at the tent tabernacle. So that's that in Deuteronomy 17. Also, we get the rules for future kings of Israel. Really interesting. You should read it, the end of Deuteronomy 17. But basically, all of the rules for these kings has to do with whose kingdom are you building as a king? What's your focus? Are you building your own kingdom, your own dynasty, your own family, or are you building God's kingdom, God's people, God's dynasty? Because there's a difference. So, Deuteronomy 17, interesting stuff. Okay, Deuteronomy 18. This outlines what portion of the offerings should go to the priests, the on-duty priests, and the Levites as their inheritance. Because, again, they didn't receive a chunk of the land of Israel like the other tribes did. Also, occult practices are outlawed very explicitly for Israel. Child sacrifice, divination, sorcery, interpreting omens, witchcraft, spells, mediums, spiritists, and necromancers. All outlawed for Israel, all outlawed for God's people. I think it's something we need to pay attention to. As people of God, we're supposed to get our spiritual knowledge from God, not from people who find other ways of getting spiritual information. Can it be difficult? Yes, but it's the right thing to do, is to stay away from alternate sources of spiritual information. We should get our spiritual information from God and God alone. Okay, also in Deuteronomy 18, my pages stuck together, we hear about this prophet like Moses, and I want to read it for you. The Lord your God will rise up for you a prophet like me, this is Moses, from among you, from your fellow Israelites. You must listen to him, for this is what you asked of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of assembly, when you said, let us not hear the voice of the Lord our God, nor see this great fire anymore, or we will die. The Lord said to me, what they say is good. I will rise up for them a prophet like you from among their fellow Israelites, and I will put my words in his mouth. He will tell them everything I command him. I myself will call into account anyone who does not listen to my words that the prophet speaks in my name. But a prophet who presumes to speak in my name anything I have not commanded, or a prophet who speaks in the name of other gods, is to be put to death. Okay, it continues on. It's interesting, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, because yes, this could be talking about a series of prophets that God rises up, especially the ones that wrote the scripture. Yes, okay, I concede. However, I think the scripture bears out that the chunk of this prophecy is actually pointed towards Jesus, and we are going to get there in today's reading. Okay, Deuteronomy 19, we have again the cities of refuge are being fleshed out. So these cities where someone who unintentionally kills someone, there's no malice, it was just an accident, they can flee and live in these cities, basically live out a life sentence in these cities. But it's interesting because the main concern of the cities of refuge is not the murderer, and it's not the accidental killer. It's not even the killed. A main concern is that blood that is spilled, human blood that is spilled, is sinful. It pollutes the land, which is supposed to be dedicated to God, and it must be dealt with. It's an interesting concept. Okay. Also, in Deuteronomy 19, the concept of having multiple witnesses to convict someone of a crime is laid out. So you can't just have one person saying, this guy did this. There has to be multiple witnesses. Now, I want to posit to you that this means lines of evidence. It doesn't just mean like that someone has to do something and it's visible by 2 or 3 witnesses. I think this also means lines of evidence that would accuse someone of a crime. And the reason why I say this is because God, later on in the prophets, and even here in Deuteronomy, he's going to call the heavens and the earth as a witness. You could say, okay, Corie, but the heavens have, sentient creatures in them. So maybe he's calling the creatures of the heavens and the people of the earth. Okay, sure. But then later on in the Old Testament, God's going to call the mountains as witnesses against Israel. And that's interesting because the mountains are places where Israel built their high places. So God is pointing to the places where the crime was committed as evidence. So multiple witnesses doesn't just mean someone who saw the crime happen or someone to whom the crime happened against. It also can mean lines of evidence. You can't just we do this in our courts today too. You have to have evidence to convict somebody of a crime. And that's what God is establishing here in Deuteronomy 19. Okay, Deuteronomy 20, this is all about warfare. Basically, when you go into battle, ancient Israel, don't be afraid because God goes with you. The priests were also supposed to go with the fighting men as proof of that and actually pep talk them. A pep talk is outlined in Deuteronomy 20. And also there's exemptions here given for military service. So if you've just built a house, you don't have to go to war. If you've just planted a vineyard, you don't have to go to war. If you're pledged to be married, you don't have to go to war. And the principle behind this is that God wanted Israel to experience the blessings of the promised land, not just to be fighting all the time, which is a beautiful concept. There's also rules here for making peace treaties, for the conquest, and also for normal warfare, all in Deuteronomy 20. Okay, Deuteronomy 21, what to do in the case of an unsolved murder. Because human blood is a problem, as we've already established throughout Deuteronomy. Spilled human blood is a problem. So there's a ritual that's done to absolve the land of innocent bloodshed, meaning they do an animal sacrifice. Also, it talks about how to marry captive women. Basically, the women are supposed to have a period of mourning for their families. They're to embrace their new life. They're welcomed into the tribes of Israel. And this is symbolic. Just like a Nazirite vow, at the end of a Nazirite vow, they shave their head, they cut their nails, they bathe, they accept new clothing, new Israelite clothing. Then they're married as a full wife, not as a slave or something like that. They're not to be sold or traded. They have full inclusion as a woman of Israel, even if they are to be divorced, even if they're divorced later on. Okay, we're also told in Deuteronomy 21 that the right of a firstborn son to inherit his father's property cannot be overridden by love for another child. So favoritism of the father and mother cannot play a part in inheritance. But then the question is left hanging. But what if that firstborn is tremendously rebellious and evil? And we're told that the right of the inheritance of the firstborn does not include the right to break the 5th commandment of honoring the mother and father. So the father and mother are still in authority over their firstborn son, and they can choose to hand over their authority to the community to judge their son. It's interesting and it's brutal. Okay. Oh, we also get this concept that Israel is supposed to treat all bodies with respect, meaning dead bodies. So if a body is hung up, it's brutal, it's graphic. This happened in the ancient world all the time as a sign. This is what happens. If you come against us, or if you break the law, or if you're an enemy to the king, if a body's hung up for display, it must be buried by nightfall, or else they're going to desecrate the land of Israel. You basically can't become the Assyrians. If you studied ancient Assyrian history, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, Deuteronomy chapter 22, random laws like help missing and or endangered animals. If an animal falls in a pit, help it out. If you see it, help it. Also, don't mix categories in your society. Keep them distinct. Men and women's clothing, keep them distinct. Seeds in your vineyard, keep them distinct. Don't plow with an oxen and a donkey yoked together, keep them distinct. Don't wear clothes made of linen and wool, keep them distinct. Linen and wool was only to be worn by the priest, which is interesting. Keep things as they are, don't mix them, keep boundaries. Interesting. Also, they were told what to do about marriage violations, divorce, extramarital relations, and assault. And when we read about these things in Deuteronomy 22, we need to remember that this was in a time where marriage was a societal obligation. It was about order. It was about family. It was about structure and society and business a lot of the times. It was not about primarily love or lust or desire. And when it became about lust, punishments brought it back to being about society. So keep that in mind as you're reading Deuteronomy 22. Okay, Deuteronomy 23. Excuse me. I'm going to take a sip of coffee here. I apologize. I still have a bit of a cold. Deuteronomy 23. These are all about things that would exclude you from formal worship ceremonies in Israel. Castration, forbidden marriages, meaning marriage with a foreign non-convert to Judaism, being an Ammonite or a Moabite because of their treatment of Israel in the wilderness. It also talks about how to keep their military camps from becoming ritually defiled. And then there's miscellaneous laws about allowing slaves to take refuge in Israel, not allowing shrine prostitution, not charging Israelites interest, fulfilling vows to God in a quick and timely manner. Like, they're miscellaneous. They're kind of all over the place. Deuteronomy 24, this continues these various miscellaneous laws. Some highlights: divorce should be seen as final. This probably was meant to deter people from doing it, from getting divorced. They were told to look to the benefit of the other person in all circumstances. For example, do not take pledges, meaning valuable items, for loans. So don't take things like millstones that they need to make their food with, or their cloak that they need to keep them warm at night. So always thinking about the value and the concerns of the other person that you're interacting with. Deuteronomy 25, again, this continues. A highlight of Deuteronomy 25 would be Levirate marriage, meaning brother marriage. And it's so weird to us today in our day of marriage for love and scientific advancements that help our fertility. But basically, this is Levirate marriage. If a woman's husband died while they were still childless, her brother-in-law, so her husband's brother, was to marry her and provide for her. And the goal of this marriage is not only to provide and protect the woman, who in that society didn't have a lot of options, and to bear a child that would have the dead husband's name and would inherit his property. It was legally his child. And this was to keep the tribal territories from being acquired by other families. All right. It was also, we learned from Deuteronomy 25 that it was seen as extremely dishonorable for a man to refuse to do this for a widow. We learned that inheritance of the promised land was top priority. It's interesting. It's different. Okay, Deuteronomy 26, we've got first fruits, tithing, discussed again. It's thanking God for his fulfillment of his covenant with Abraham. And every third year, rather than bringing it to the tabernacle, they're celebrating in their towns with all the disadvantage of society. Beautiful. Throw a feast. Have a party. Deuteronomy 27, They're told that when they go into the promised land, they're supposed to build an altar on Mount Ebal, this is by the city of Shechem, and set up 2 large stones covered in plaster with the words of the law of God written on the plaster, and have a covenant ceremony there at Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. These 2 mountains flank the city of Shechem. Deuteronomy 28, blessings for obedience of the covenant and curses for disobedience of the covenant are laid out. In Deuteronomy 29 and 30, we've got this renewal of a covenant ceremony is given by Moses. It's arbitrated by Moses before the Israelites enter the promised land. So that's 29 and 30. And Deuteronomy 31, Joshua receives leadership of Israel from Moses. Moses passes the buck. There's a record of Moses writing the law and handing it off to the priests who were commanded to read it at the Feast of Tabernacles every year of Jubilee, meaning every 7th year. For all of Israel, for all the foreigners, men, women, and children, everyone had to hear the law. All right. God also tells Moses and Joshua about the future rebellion of Israel. God knows this isn't going to go well. And God tells Moses to write a song and teach it to the people. So at least, if not his law, at least this song will get passed down from generation to generation and be a witness for them of what has happened to them. That's interesting. God knows they're not going to follow the law, but they're probably going to remember a song. So human nature. Deuteronomy 32, we've got the Song of Moses. Deuteronomy 33, Moses blesses Israel and all the tribes. And Deuteronomy 34, Moses dies on Mount Nebo. He's 120 years old. And a later editor, I want to read this to you because this has to do with that prophet. A later editor adds this in to the book of Deuteronomy, verse 10. Since then, meaning since Moses died, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, who did all those signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his officials and to his whole land, for no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. They were waiting for a prophet like Moses to come. Is it any wonder then, when Jesus comes in the New Testament, first it starts with John the Baptist. The scribes and the Pharisees come to John the Baptist and they say, "Are you the Messiah?" He says, "No." And they say, "Are you the prophet?" This is what they're talking about. Excuse me. They're talking about this prophet like Moses. And then the gospel authors go out of their way to show how Jesus Christ was this prophet like Moses. Really interesting. Excuse me. All right. Now we're going to move on to the first 4 chapters of Joshua super quickly. Joshua 1. Joshua gets his orders from God. God will be with you. Be strong and courageous. Know and follow the law. Short and sweet. This is what he's got to do. Then Joshua gets the people ready to cross over the Jordan into the promised land. This is it. This is what they've been waiting for 40 years. Joshua chapter 2. Joshua sends 2 spies over ahead of them into the city of Jericho. And this is where we get the story of Rahab the prostitute, who becomes a convert to Israel and Israel's God. And she actually marries in and she finds herself in the line of Jesus, the Messiah. It's amazing. So she's an exception to this rule. She joins Israel rather than defy them or run away. There is only those 3 options: join them, defy them, run away, and Rahab joins them. Okay, Joshua chapter 3, Israel crosses the Jordan River, and the priests go first, carrying the Ark of the Covenant, and there's this miracle of the Jordan River drying up. The flow of the Jordan River stops when the priest's feet get into the water. And Joshua had told them beforehand that that's what was going to happen. when the priests go in there, the river's going to stop and we're going to walk through on dry land. So the fact that this happens verifies Joshua not only as a leader of Israel, but also as a prophet. I would say like Moses. So it's interesting that Deuteronomy says, not quite like Moses. Not quite like Moses, Corie. Not quite. Okay, fair enough. Jesus is going to be the prophet like Moses. I get it. All right. Joshua chapter 4, they set up 12 stones from the Jordan River as a memorial to commemorate this Jordan River crossing. And when the priests leave the riverbed of the Jordan, the water begins to flow back. And that wraps up our weekly reading. I'm not going to recap the Psalms, but that's the end of our recap for that. Okay, so a couple viewer questions. Toby Guile, 3411. This is from our comments section on YouTube from a couple weeks back. Toby says, hi guys, in Leviticus 14:14, what is the significance of putting blood on the ear, thumb, and toe? Do we know? Thank you so much. Okay, hi Toby, thank you for sending in your question. So Leviticus 14 is talking about the cleansing. I think this is the cleansing of the sin offering, isn't it? I mean, a cleansing of a skin disease. Let me see. Yes. Okay. But what's really interesting, so this is what happens when you're healed of a skin disease. You would offer a sacrifice, and then the priest, 14 says, the priest is to take some of the blood of the guilt offering and put it on the lobe of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of their right hand, and on the big toe of the right foot. What's interesting about this, excuse my cold and my cold symptoms, I know it's not pleasant for you guys who have to listen, but it's interesting because when they inaugurated the priests, the sons of Aaron, they also did this to them. And I don't know for sure, but here's what I think it means. Everything that you hear, everything that you do, everywhere that you go has been cleansed. And now you can walk in the ways of the Lord. So for the priests, it allowed them to walk in the holy area of the tabernacle. But for someone who has had a skin disease, they've been excommunicated from society. So they basically have to walk around, and they were considered the living dead. They were basically dead. They had to leave their homes because they were contagious. They just had to go live somewhere else. They were unclean. But now they were re-entering society. So they've been cleansed, and now they're able, like the priests could walk in the holy place, now they could walk in the congregation of the children of Israel again. So I think that's what it means. Everything that you hear, everywhere that you go, and everything that you do has now been cleansed again. You're entering from death into life, just as the priests were going from unholy to holy. Let me know what you think about that. Do you think I'm onto something there? Have you guys heard anything else about why it would be ear, thumb, toe? Let me know. Okay, last one for today. Cindy Winstanley 806 says this, again from just a couple of videos ago. As I'm reading about all of the offerings, was wondering about the timeline for everyone. With so many people, are these offerings going on all day, every day? Okay, I don't have a solid answer for this. Thank you for your question. But I would think so, yes. We know that certain times of the year would have been extremely busy. The 3 festivals a year that Israelites would travel to wherever the tabernacle was in the early history of Israel, and then to Jerusalem in the later history of Israel when they had a temple. So those times of year would have been extremely busy. Imagine around the clock sacrifices. And, but there were other offerings that happened at the prerogative of the person, whether that be a peace offering, like the fellowship offering, or a sin offering, or offerings for childbirth, purification after childbirth, or even Nazirite vow offerings. So we get this concept that the temple and tabernacle were probably very, very busy places. And unfortunately, from the prophets, we learned that later on in the time period of the kings, they were also doing pagan practices in the temple. They were worshiping other gods and worshiping God via idols and things. So basically other gods. So I'm sure the activity at the temple just got more and more and more and more and more. So yes, it seems like it was probably a very hopping, happening, busy place to be. So that's how I would answer that. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. And importantly, if you have questions for upcoming episodes or even comments, please pop them in the comment section down below, because I love not only reading them, but also being able to bring them onto the show and discuss them here with you once again. And if you are listening on a different app or watching on a different app, go to our website, BibleDiscoveryTV.com. You can get all of our contact info there to send us a question or a comment. All right, guys, I think that's it for today. Thank you so much for putting up with my cold and spending some time with me. Hopefully on next week's program, Matlock will be back with us. That would be fantastic. So that's it for me. Until next week, happy reading and studying.